Welcome to Wellness Wednesday. That is bright. My name is Keely Severson. I am a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist and founder of Exposing Mold. And today we are going to talk about mold avoidance. Mold avoidance is by far one of the most popular topics in the mold community. It's not currently expressed in the way that it was created. What is mold avoidance? Mold avoidance is not dodging mold spores. It's not running from the sight of mold in fear. That is not what mold avoidance is. If anybody ever tells you that mold avoidance isn't possible because mold is everywhere, please understand that the person making that statement has no understanding of what mold avoidance is and has not learned how to practice it, has not learned anything about it, and they're just making a ridiculous statement that mold is everywhere, which we all know mold is everywhere. Mold avoidance as a recovery strategy was actually founded by Eric Johnson, the Exposing Mold Research and Education Director, and it's rooted in the history of biowarfare training. When Eric was in the military, he was learning about biowarfare, and he had to learn specific decontamination strategies and how to stay out of the range of nerve agents so that him and his unit did not suffer the ill health effects of the nerve agent exposure when they were potentially exposed in a wartime event. Okay. Eric later in his mold illness journey realized that mold is behaving the same way as the nerve agents can behave, and you do have to decon them. You do have to stay out of range of them to recover. Like, obviously, you want to stay out of range of something that's frying your nervous system, right? You wouldn't try to like throw a vitamin at that. So it's rooted in biowarfare training developed by Eric. And Eric developed this under his theory of the effect. So the idea is there's an effect happening. When we familiarize with ourselves with the effect, we can try to stay away from the effect. Mold avoidance is currently taught in all the mold avoidance groups and books in terms of toxins. People are naming toxins, they're creating new toxin names, they can't get away from all the toxins. They're not focusing on the effect, learning what the effect is, and staying out of the range of the effect. This is the biggest, I don't want to say failure, but it is kind of a failure, misunderstanding in mold avoidance that that is perpetuated by basically everyone teaching mold avoidance. People use the term Eric style mold avoidance, and then they'll explain something that's not Eric style. So I would say, unless you're learning about mold avoidance from Eric or from our group, you're not going to hear mold avoidance represented in terms of the effect. You're going to hear mold avoidance information slightly misrepresented. Even the mold avoidance books that have been put out in Eric's name don't have the full information in terms of like Eric's actual teachings. And that's actually where some of the toxin name information was introduced. That wasn't really Eric's information, but it was put into those books. And those books have been like the guiding light for mold avoiders. And it's kind of not on the most solid foundation, I would say. We want to clarify that. We want people to understand mold avoidance in the terms of the effect. Sometimes I see like really basic questions from like the experts in the mold avoidance groups, and it's like, why does every dehumidifier I buy bother me? Well, if you learned about the effect and you listened and you understood it, that actually the explanation is built into that theory. And so there's all this missing information. People aren't understanding. because people have really just latched onto Eric's work and then taken it over as their own. And when there's confusion, they don't even clarify with him. It's just utterly bizarre. So we're going to move on to discussing 3 benefits of mold avoidance. I understand that mold avoidance is a pretty drastic lifestyle change, and it's not going to be a good fit for everybody. Let me clarify that. Everybody can not probably, everyone could benefit from understanding and learning this for their health, but not everyone is to the point where they have to do this for their health. And so it can seem really extreme to people. But when you have lost your quality of life and you have lost your health, you will do extreme things to get that back. And when you get driven to that place, this is where the information, this is why we want this ready for you so that you have access to it. God forbid your health decline that far. 3 benefits of mold avoidance are, it can be taxing as a lifestyle because it seems like you always have to adjust for something, especially in the beginning when you're really sensitive. But a really big benefit of mold avoidance is reliance on self-trust and your symptoms and your reactions over the opinions of others. This is really empowering because you completely take control over your health. You're not begging which doctors for which tests and which supplements. None of that. You develop self-trust over your senses with your reactions to a point that unless you have a broken bone or an infection that needs antibiotics, you can really take control over your health. And for those who have spent thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands on their health, this is a very empowering concept. And it completely disintegrates the reliance on doctors to validate your illness, because the second benefit of mold avoidance is the ability to develop your own mold radar. You will be absolutely shocked when you're able to do this well, how many of your diagnoses and signs and symptoms and health conditions completely fall away by practicing mold avoidance, which to me begs the question, was mold exposure the root cause of those illness expressions? If eliminating the exposure eliminates that illness expression, I think there's a really interesting idea there. The third benefit is what I just said. It's improved health. You're going to be shocked if you think that you have anxiety, if you think you have mast cell activation syndrome, if you think that you have, name your condition. When you're able to avoid the things that bother you and really fully understand contamination and how it works, you have total control over your health and improving it in a way that's just a miracle. So how would you know if mold avoidance is right for you? Like we said, it's not everyone is at the stage in the journey where they need to start looking at this. People usually are really desperate before they get to this point. And the things that drive people to desperation is feeling like they have mold in their house, but none of the inspectors that have been out can find it. That might be one situation where you're like, well, is it my house? Do I want to try practicing mold avoidance as a starting point to see if I'm reacting to my house? People who have had remediations and they're still sick and they don't understand why, likely because they don't understand the scams in the industry and how often and the reasons why remediation can fail, they can start thinking, well, I've had this fixed, so mold isn't the issue. There's something else going on there. Well, I don't know. Did you really have it fixed? There are so many scams in the industry. It's very easy to say, maybe you really didn't have it fixed. Maybe we should take a look at the work plan and what was done and see if it was actually really fixed. When people start not being sure if a remediation was successful, or they can't validate the mold presence in their house through like an air test or another test, or they just can't find the area, This is when mold avoidance is like, okay, maybe we should integrate some of these first few steps just to see if there is something in the house that is affecting us. It's like doing an experiment because there are so many failures in the industry with remediation and testing. And if patients don't empower themselves with that information, you can't even really get off the ground with recovery. If you're constantly in a state of emotional distress in a water damaged home, that's a sign that your health is really tipping off the deep end. That might be a good starting point for mold avoidance. If you're extremely sick, if you're extremely confused, if you're on the brink of divorce and you're desperate to save your family, this is the step that you're at, because this is where, like, if you've tried everything and nothing else has worked, like some of us have, this is what brings us to this point. So we're going to dive into, let's see these questions here. Lisa Light, can an allergist test you for mold exposure? What questions should I ask? An allergist can test you for an allergy to mold. Mold toxicity is not a mold allergy. So you can have mold toxicity and not necessarily be allergic to mold, or not necessarily have anything come up on your allergy tests. Mainstream doctors in general, Lisa Light, do not recognize mold-related syndromes because the American Medical Association does not recognize mold-related syndromes. So doctors are practicing under their license, and they have to follow the guides of the American Medical Association. So, no, I would say not. You're not going to get very far with an allergist. Lisa says, or you can't afford it either. If you're talking about remediation and testing, a lot of the companies are very expensive, Lisa, but you don't have to work with a mold remediation company to remediate mold, especially if you know where the area of water damage is. You can contract that out with like a handyman or a carpenter. If you know what to put in the work order in the contract to contract someone out, you can be in full control of that. And you can call a few people to see like who can help you remove drywall insulation. And my cat is so loud. And yeah, you don't necessarily have to pay like $40,000 or $60,000 or even more for a mold remediation. There are other options. Lisa says it's so frustrating knowing you have it but can't afford to fix it or move or spend that much money. My health is bad. Yeah, I mean, I understand that line of thinking, but also your health is all that you have, and you need that to move on. So I know it's really hard to like do something super brave and bold where you don't feel like you have a safety net, but sometimes you just have to jump in this illness, Lisa. And I know that's really scary, but there's really no obstacle that would stop me from getting out of a moldy building. I would do anything to not have to do that because of how sick I get. Eric, oh my gosh, Eric, that's so funny. Eric said, I love you, Eric. You're so funny. Eric says, ask your Army biowarfare specialist if avoidance is right for you. Yeah, you should. That was a good one. Okay, that was funny. So we're just gonna, okay, it's over now. I can stop laughing. We're just gonna discuss the 4 stages of mold avoidance. Now we're gonna do a free talk on this on a Friday night in a couple weeks where we describe this way more in depth. So this is kind of an overview. This is by far the question we get the most in our inboxes, on social media, in our emails. people contacting us for, like, how do I do mold avoidance? What is this? What is that? So we're going to lay it all out in a free talk. It will be probably on Zoom. Yes, it will be on Zoom. I'll get back to you on that detail. I'm not sure. I just realized we can record on this app too. Okay, anyway, stages of mold avoidance. The first step for mold avoidance is unmasking and getting clear of contamination. So what this literally translates to is taking a break from a moldy house and items in a moldy house, including like clothes, like literally everything. It's called, Eric calls it a sabbatical, I think. And what happens is when you take a break from that environment that is making you sick, your immune system has just a minute to catch its breath and be like, okay, what was happening here? Let's try to process this exposure, okay? And the only way that you can really unmask and get clear is not being inside mold and not having contamination. So people who are doing mold avoidance inside their cars that they had when they lived in a moldy building are going to be so confused about why they're still sick for years, because they've never even done step one of fully getting clear. Now, I've heard people call this like good enough mold avoidance. Well, if the progress you made in 3 years could have been made in 6 months had it been done differently, is it really good enough, or are you just really dragging out your recovery? And that's the thing with unmasking. If you underestimate the intensity of how a moldy building or contaminated items can keep you sick, you will never even cross to getting clear. Now, this is a continuous process. When I began to unmask, I went from an apartment that was leaking to an apartment that had like dead dried mold. Now, we didn't bring any of our items and we left the wet apartment. So we were exposed to much less contamination and mold exposure until we found the dead mold and then exposed ourselves to that. Different story. And I was still able to unmask. So while you do need to separate yourself from contamination to unmask, it really can be a continuous process in identifying your senses. The second aspect of mold avoidance is understanding intensification in your reactions. This is like where the learning curve gets really high really quick. So when you begin to unmask and get clear by separating yourself from your items, then when you re-expose some when you are re-exposed to something that triggers you or that bothers your immune system or is contaminated or is moldy, you basically are then introduced to your mold hypersensitivity, because your symptoms will flare with the re-exposure, and it could flare in 2 days or it could flare in 3 hours, or it could flare immediately. We did a video on why this reaction time varies in our Patreon group if you want to join to watch that. But the reaction time can vary. Basically, the healthier your immune system is, the quicker you're going to react. And the more masked that you still are, the slower you're going to react. But understanding that these reactions are not, oh my gosh, this is failing, I'm not actually getting better, I'm getting worse because I have these reactions. No, that's not what's happening. You are reacting to something that you shouldn't be by, and your body is freaking out because it just had a break and it's trying to recover. That's what's happening when people go into intensification. And if you can look at it as, I need to learn my reactions, then you can move into stage 3, which is developing discernment and self-trust. This is the stage where you have said, oh my goodness, the only thing I kept from my moldy house is all of these pots and pans and dishes. And every time I'm in my kitchen, my symptoms flare. I am reacting to my symptoms. Now, instead of me being confused about what's happening, I have developed so much discernment and self-trust over understanding that I'm unmasking, I'm intentionally getting clear, I'm learning my reactions. And now when I react, I believe it. I'm not calling my doctor to say, oh my God, I need an anxiety pill. I'm not freaking out and going to ask somebody like, well, I do freak out and go ask Eric and Alicia, like, what's going on? Or I did a year ago, maybe. But you eventually develop this self-trust with your reactions where you know, if I just step out of range over here to this thing that's bothering me, I actually feel a lot better. My heart slows down, my face redness eases up. I am feeling so much better. And this is where the empowerment comes in for mold sick people. I feel like this is where you take your power back from your doctors, from inspectors that can't find the mold, from remediation people who just want to fog your house. Like, this is the empowerment because now you trust yourself, you know what's going on, and nobody can tell you that it's psycho-emotional or that it's just stress or that it's just anxiety or that it's just something else, because you know you're developing this trust. And I feel like this lack of self-trust and fear really are two things that hold people back from starting the mold avoidance journey so significantly that in 20 or 30 years, we really might come to the point of like people who get this and people who don't. And the people who don't or can't really, really might phase themselves out of the population, out of the gene pool entirely, because our medical system isn't acknowledging this. Our government bodies are not acknowledging this. We can't really force them, but we can try. But if they still don't, we still have to take care of our health. We can't just like beg them to take care of our health for us. We have to put it in our own hands. And if this effect, when Eric created chronic fatigue syndrome by allowing his blood to be used to differentiate what the syndrome actually was, he said to the doctors, please make sure this is looked into before there are millions of us. Mold hypersensitivity and this illness wasn't all over the board way back when. This effect has spread, and this effect is continuing to spread so significantly. I mean, you can just see it in the mold groups from what people were saying 2 or 3 years ago and how fast the groups are growing to what's happening now. I mean, the groups are growing really quickly. The complaints are getting more extreme. The presentations of the illness are getting more extreme. I mean, the effect is spreading. If it continues to spread to this speed in the next 20 or 40 years, it will come, and we don't have the support of people understanding this, it will come down to like, if you understand these skills, you'll survive, and if you don't, you probably won't. Like, it's literally that serious for those of us who have been this injured. I would say the fourth stage of mold avoidance is what is like, this is just a term I made up. This isn't like a technical term, but more advanced mold strategies. Once you kind of get the basics down, you can understand things like how the Venturi effect might play a role in your health. Now, that is a part of Eric's theory on the effect. If you don't know that, if you don't know about the Venturi effect, you don't know about the effect, and you don't know about like mold avoidance in the way that it was created and taught. The Venturi effect is a clue in helping us not only identify contamination, but also identify bad locations. So it's pretty crucial to being able to differentiate, am I in contamination? Is location bad? Is it one or the other? Is it both? These can be confusing questions for even experienced mold avoiders. We are going to do a free talk on like really developing the concepts of these 4 stages of mold avoidance and giving more information, because this is something that has gotten a lot of attention in the community, and people are always seeking answers, and a lot of times the answers that they are getting really are not answers that are in accordance with understanding mold avoidance through the lens of the effect. And if you want to be successful in recovery, you have to let go of the term MT, hell toxin, chlorine toxin, like whatever these made up toxins are, and stop trying to name what you feel and focus on what you feel and trusting that, and understanding what that means for your health in the greater picture of an immune system injury that has made you hypersensitive. So look out for announcements on Instagram, on Facebook, on our social medias, for when we will have that class. we just want to offer that as basics for the community because they need it. If you have any other questions, feel free to email them, exposingmold@gmail.com. If you want to join our Patreon group and take the class about the difference in reaction times, or the chronic fatigue syndrome, the heart of the matter talk, where we discuss how heart pathologies are a big part of this illness, please join our Patreon group. We'd love to have you. The effect, increased bioavailability. Eric is saying the effect, it basically explains how these toxins have increased bioavailability. And that's actually a really good point, because when something has increased bioavailability, you focus on, well, because I'm smelling bleach and I'm reacting to this, I'm thinking that this is one of my giant triggers, instead of like, what is the effect that made that more bioavailable and how can I mitigate that effect? So that's really what we want to focus on. You guys want to say hi or bye?
Hi, bye.
Finn, you want to say hi?
Hi, bye.
Nobody got to see you, cutie tootie. Did you get wet? Did you go in the pool? Oh my goodness. Okay, I gotta go.
Bye, love you more. Bye.
Sweetie. That was so sweet. Thank you. Thank you for joining Wellness Wednesday. Let us know if you have any questions. If you want to reserve a spot in the class, let us know. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
No.